All right, as we know, there are many promising uses of blockchain and cryptocurrencies as well. But at the same time, there has been a strong regulatory resistance to their adoption. To give you some examples, the US Securities and Exchange Commission has banned Bitcoin exchange-traded funds, or ETFs. We've seen China banning cryptocurrency trading and ICOs. We have seen major traditional banks banning their customers or clients from buying cryptocurrencies. We've seen central banks issuing public warnings about engaging in cryptocurrency trading and even investing in cryptocurrencies. So what are all these concerns revolving around? Well, there's several issues that are out there, but two major issues that are concerning regulators at the moment are the use of cryptocurrencies in financing criminal activity, so drugs, weapons, hacks, forgeries, pornography, and those types of things. And the second is the use of cryptocurrencies in money laundering, evading capital controls, evading taxes, financing terrorists, and so forth. Okay? Now, to give you some examples of what we have in mind here by this criminal activity, let me take you to the first one here and ask, what is this that we're looking at here? This is a Bitcoin transaction. It's a payment from one counterparty to another in Bitcoin, but it's a little bit more than that. According to US FBI allegations, it's actually a payment for the execution of someone. This is, according to US FBI allegations, a payment from Ross Ulbricht to commission the execution of Blake Crockoff, age 34, wife and 3 kids. And this particular execution wouldn't have been possible had not been for the ability to make a digital payment in a relatively anonymous system. I'll give you a few more examples. What is this? Looks very much like the interface for eBay. We've got a bunch of products, you've got a bunch of product categories, you've got a bunch of prices, but here we're looking at a whole range of drugs that can be bought online. This is Silk Road, one of the online marketplaces that is the eBay of drugs, eBay of illegal goods and services, okay, with all the prices here denoted in Bitcoin. It looks very much like eBay. It's a very organized platform. You can click on individual items, see information about the items, about the postage, about getting insurance on that item being delivered to you. You can click on sellers and buyers and have a look at the ratings and reviews that have been left for these sellers and buyers as well. It's not limited to drugs. Here's a range of weapons that you can find online in the darknet and buy them very easily with Bitcoin. You want someone taken care of? This can also be arranged in the darknet, as long as you have a supply of Bitcoin that you can use to make the payments. We've got here an example of a private military company that offers to kill common people, kill important people without bodyguards, kill important people with bodyguards. My favorite down the bottom is kill someone and blame another. Click on there, negotiate what you want done, get your Bitcoin ready, go through with the transaction. And then there's a very, very dark corner of the darknet that deals in child pornography, that deals in pedophilia, that deals in streaming webcam views of rape and torture of people in rooms, where the payments for these types of services are also often conducted in Bitcoin. Okay, so that's a bunch of anecdotal evidence. There is no doubt that some criminal activity gets financed through cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin included. The question is, are these isolated examples? Is this a drop in the ocean, or is there something pervasive and systematic going on here? And that's what we set out to quantify in this particular study. We developed methods to quantify how much illegal activity is being financed through Bitcoin and to characterize the nature of that illegal activity. I'm going to run you through our methods, and then I'm going to show you the results and then speak briefly about the implications of those results. So there's 3 steps to our methodology here. The first is to take the Bitcoin blockchain and partially de-anonymize it. So to identify users of Bitcoin and then convert the Bitcoin blockchain into a more traditional data set of users transacting with one another. The second step is to identify a sample of illegal activity, and I'll show you 3 methods for how we do that. And the third step is to take that sample of illegal activity and use it to estimate the population or the totality of the illegal activity that happens in Bitcoin network. So here's the first step, making sense of the raw Bitcoin blockchain data. So what we do as the first step is to use an algorithm developed by a computer scientist called the Union Find algorithm to stitch together individual Bitcoin addresses into groups or clusters of addresses that identify individual users. So here, for example, in these two transactions, I can tell you through, by application of this algorithm, that the first block of 4 Bitcoin addresses all belong or are controlled by one user. The second block is also controlled by one user. And because I see a common address across the two transactions, through transitivity, I can now tell you that all 8 of these addresses are controlled by the same user. So what we end up with after running this algorithm over the Bitcoin blockchain is Bitcoin addresses clustered up into users, and we can see all the transactions between those users. So you can think about this as the network diagram as a static snapshot of what we have after application of this algorithm. But we have more than a static snapshot. In fact, we have a dynamic trade network here. We have users A, B, C, D, E, F, and so forth, and we can see the transactions through time between each of these individual users. Okay, so very much like this diagram, C sending Bitcoin to C sending Bitcoin to A sending Bitcoin to B, and so forth. Okay. Now the next step is to identify a sample of the known illegal activity. And so to do this, we exploit 3 different approaches. The first is to draw on the work of law enforcement agencies and the criminal activity that they have already uncovered in the Bitcoin network. So let me give you an example of how we exploit the work of law enforcement agencies. This is the payment system that is used by Silk Road. If you want to go to Silk Road, the eBay of drugs, and buy yourself some cannabis, here's how it works. You take your fiat currency, go through some form of exchange to get that fiat currency converted into Bitcoin. Your Bitcoin is now deposited and sitting there ready to be used for making payments to Silk Road. You identify what products you want to buy. Once you have committed to purchasing some illegal products on Silk Road, your Bitcoin gets sent into the escrow accounts of Silk Road, where it is held until such time as Silk Road is convinced that this transaction is complete and the goods have been delivered, at which point the escrow account releases the Bitcoin through to the seller of the drugs, who can then exchange it back out into fiat currency. And along the way, Silk Road skims off a commission at the point of the escrow account. So when the US FBI uncovered Silk Road and seized the Silk Road site, what it actually seized in terms of the Bitcoin was all the Bitcoin sitting in the escrow accounts and all the Bitcoin commissions that had been skimmed off and gone into the personal account of Ross Ulbricht. Now, these were proceeds of crime, and these were auctioned off by the US FBI in a public auction, which was observable. We could see the times, the dates, and the amounts that were sold off to the public. Now, exploiting the complete ledger, we could take those public auctions and trace backwards to identify all the escrow accounts of Silk Road. Once we have the escrow accounts, we can now see everyone that has ever sent money into an escrow account of Silk Road and anyone that has ever received money out of an escrow account of Silk Road. So all of the buyers and all the sellers in these illegal online darknet marketplaces. Okay? That's our first approach to establishing a starting point to quantify the illegal activity in Bitcoin. Now, we don't stop with just the Silk Road case. We take every law enforcement agency action that has seized Bitcoin. We're able to observe the public auctions. So this includes cases in Europe, in US, and Australia. 2 other approaches to establish the sample of illegal activity. One, actual transactions with these illegal darknet marketplaces. To be able to buy and sell drugs online, you need to know where to send the Bitcoin. So by pinging each of the known darknet marketplaces, we identify the escrow accounts of each of these darknet marketplaces, and then all of the users of those darknet marketplaces. And the third approach is we systematically scrape all of the darknet chat forums where private transactions of illegal goods and services negotiated between individuals, and we run an algorithm over those scraped forum chats to extract out all the Bitcoin addresses. Okay, so using those 3 methods, we already get a fairly large proportion of the illegal activity. But now comes the last part of the study, which is to go from that sample of illegal activity to the estimated universe, to the totality of all the illegal activity. And here we apply 2 different methods that are completely different in their assumptions and how they work in order to make sure that we have a robust result here. The first method is a network cluster analysis algorithm known as the Smart Local moving algorithm. It works like this. I take all of the known illegal users of Bitcoin, put them in one bucket. I take everyone else that's using Bitcoin, and I put them in a second bucket. Then I systematically, sequentially, go through every one of those users and ask the question, is that user transacting predominantly with other users in the same bucket? So if I pick up a legal user from that bucket, I ask, are they transacting with other legal users or with the illegal users? If they're transacting predominantly with the illegal users, I shift them across into the illegal user bucket. If they're transacting with other legal users, I leave them in the legal user bucket. And I go through every single user, and then I go through every single user again and reclassify them and shift people between these buckets until the algorithm converges. When the algorithm converges, I've identified the legal and the illegal communities in the network on the basis of transactions. Yeah, to maximize the within community links and to minimize the between community links. The second approach is an econometric model, which is modeling the two latent processes, one being involvement in illegal activity, the second being a detection process. It's an econometric model that gets used in modeling tax evasion, nuclear power plant violations, and so forth. It relies on identification assumptions. So to not go into the technical details of how this model works, but to give you a sort of intuitive sense of how this works, it relies on there being some characteristics that identify or that are more prevalent in the illegal population compared to the legal population. Now, what are some of those characteristics that we can use to sort out the illegal crowd from the legal crowd? One example would be users that use tumbling services to conceal their patterns of activities in the Bitcoin network, okay, to break up the pattern of transactions, or wash trades, sending Bitcoin to another address that they've created for themselves. That's one of the characteristics of illegal usage. Another one is if your account transacts a high proportion of its volume immediately following shocks to the darknet marketplaces. So after a seizure, after a scam, after a hack or a raid of a darknet marketplace, if your account activity spikes in the hours or days following that event, that's another red flag for involvement in illegal activity. So we use a bunch of these different characteristics to econometrically separate out the two groups. Now, here's the main result, the main finding. These are estimates of the proportion of the Bitcoin transaction activity and users that are involved in illegal activity. We find that it's somewhere in the order of 26% of Bitcoin users that are using Bitcoin predominantly for illegal activity. Something in the order of 46% of all transactions in the Bitcoin network. And when you quantify it as the dollar value of transactions, it's again something very close to a quarter of the total dollar value of all Bitcoin transactions are transactions that are there to buy and sell illegal goods and services. Okay? How has this changed through time? So in the top panel, I have a plot of the number of illegal users and the number of legal users. They're both on two different scales. In the bottom panel, I have the estimated proportion of illegal users and statistical confidence bounds around that estimated proportion. So what you can see, if we just focus on the bottom plot with the proportion of illegal users, there's really three main phases here. Between 2009 and 2011, there's very little activity in the Bitcoin network, so we can practically ignore this phase. Between 2011, when the first darknet marketplaces start to appear, through to about 2015, this is a period of substantial growth in illegal usage of Bitcoin, and it's a period in which the Bitcoin users account for roughly 50% of all Bitcoin users at that time. This is the darknet growth phase. And then if we focus on the last few years of the sample period here, we see a decline in the proportion of illegal users, okay, from about 50% down to about 25%. Now the question is, why has this proportion of illegal users been declining in recent periods? Well, there's two answers. Number one is it actually hasn't been declining. The number of illegal users hasn't been declining. It has continued to grow. What has happened in the past few years is the growth in the legal users has outpaced the growth in the illegal users, and therefore the share of illegal users has declined. So it's not that the absolute value of illegal use has declined, but rather it's been an increase in legal usage or speculation in Bitcoin, which has driven the proportion down. And the second factor that's relevant here, for which we find evidence, is the emergence of other cryptocurrencies that have better privacy features. Dash, Monero, Zcash, and so forth have attracted some of the illegal activity. But Bitcoin still remains a dominant cryptocurrency in terms of financing illegal activity. We have a look at the characteristics of illegal users and legal users and ask the question of how do you identify an illegal user and an illegal user on the basis of characteristics. What we find is that the illegal users display characteristics that are consistent with them using Bitcoin as a payment system, as opposed to the legal users that display characteristics of a speculator. Okay, so the illegal users are conducting a larger number of transactions per user. They are conducting smaller transactions on average. They are transacting with more counterparties. They're holding a lower balance of Bitcoin. Okay, so these are all the sort of characteristics that you would expect of someone using it as a payment system to buy and sell products, as opposed to someone that's speculating on the value of Bitcoin in the future. We also find there's a bunch of more specific characteristics that can be used to identify illegal users, such as the use of tumbling services to conceal one's tracks in the Bitcoin network, the tendency to trade a large quantity of Bitcoin immediately following shocks to darknet marketplaces, and so forth. Okay, I want to talk about 4 implications of these results in my remaining 5 minutes. The first is what impact this is having on black markets. If you think about what happened with e-commerce, we had the internet, a communications protocol, plus payment systems, PayPal, Visa, MasterCard. Put those 2 things together and you get eBay, Amazon, e-commerce, which fundamentally transformed the way that retail operates. Now, until recently, the black market hadn't been subject to that transformation because we didn't have the anonymous communications protocols, we didn't have the anonymous payment systems, but along comes Tor, and along come cryptocurrencies and offer exactly what the internet and PayPal did to e-commerce. The question, however, is, are criminals willing to adopt black e-commerce? To what extent are they going to remain in the usual cash transactions versus coming online and doing their illegal activity in online systems? And the answer that we get from this study is that a significant proportion of the black market has shifted online. We estimate that this middle circle, $72 billion per annum, is the amount of illegal transactions that are conducted in Bitcoin towards the end of our sample period, per annum. To put that into perspective, on the left-hand side, you have the estimated size of the total US market for illegal drugs. That's about $100 billion per annum. And on the right-hand side, you've got the total estimated European illegal drugs market, about 24 billion. So to put this into perspective, a material or a substantial proportion of the black market has shifted online, creating a new form of black e-commerce. That's the first implication here. The second one is if we start thinking about what are the welfare implications of this. Is this good? Is this bad? Should we be concerned? Should we be celebrating? Well, it's hard to tell. There are many advantages to doing drugs online, to transacting drugs online, to transacting weapons online. For example, better regulatory oversight, potentially better ability to filter out bad products and so forth. But the downside is potentially, by making it more convenient to access these illegal goods and services, expanding the size of the black market. So these things need to be quantified before we can really comment on the welfare implications. The next implication is for the intrinsic value of Bitcoin. Although there's been a lot of speculation and talk about how to value Bitcoin, one of the basic ways to think about it is you've got a fixed supply, so the value or the price is going to come from the amount of usage. So the number of users that are going to be using Bitcoin as a payment system is going to be something that drives the value of Bitcoin. Now, if some of that use or a substantial proportion of that use as a payment system is from the illegal community, then actually, as an investment, think about what you're investing in. Something where the more illegal use of Bitcoin there is, the more your investment appreciates. The more law enforcement agencies crack down on Bitcoin, the more the value of your investment declines. Okay, so it has ethical implications as well as an investment. And finally, what we have developed here is potentially a surveillance tool. This is something, a set of methods that could be used by regulators and law enforcement agencies to keep a finger on the pulse, to monitor what's happening in the online black markets, something to identify key hubs in the network of illegal activity and shut down key hubs. It's also something that can be used by the private sector for screening clients and for identifying probability scores of a client being involved in illegal activity. Okay, so just in conclusion here, what we have done in this study is develop methods that allow us to quantify and characterize the nature of illegal activity that is financed through Bitcoin. We find that that illegal proportion of Bitcoin usage is relatively substantial. We're talking about a quarter of Bitcoin users, close to a half of all the transactions. What we've developed here is potentially a surveillance tool that, with better understanding by lawmakers and by regulators of the risks and benefits of cryptocurrencies, we hope that actually this research will aid in further adoption of blockchain technologies down the line. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We just got a couple of questions come up on Slido, if you'd like to take any of those.
So let me talk about the middle one, which is, what jurisdictional domain are we applying this to? Well, we're not restricting to any jurisdiction in particular. We're looking globally, and our concept of what makes an illegal user is if they're engaging in transactions that would otherwise in their home jurisdiction be regarded as illegal. Now, because generally across most jurisdictions there is a fair degree of consistency across what is illegal and what is legal, then this jurisdictional question is not too much of an issue for our particular global study. There's something about our data having a heavy US slant in an illegal activity. I think to the extent that there have been other studies that have been trying to pinpoint the geographic distribution of involvement in darknet marketplaces, and a substantial proportion of that illegal activity, just on the basis of where these products are being shipped to and shipped from, a substantial proportion of the activity is US-based, okay? But it does cover activity in a large number of other jurisdictions. We're now working on a follow-up study that is going to try and pinpoint more accurately the geographic locations of these particular users so we can characterize geographic distributions of the illegal activity and how that's been shifting through time as well.
And maybe last one.
Okay. So any comparison available on how much illegal activity there is using crypto versus not using crypto? Well, it's difficult to quantify all of the illegal activity that happens outside of cryptocurrencies, that happens with traditional cash payments. The two reference points that I flashed up on the slide previously were only dealing with illegal drugs and how big those illegal drug markets are in the US and in Europe by estimates. And so what we're seeing is that as a proportion of the illegal drug markets, the illegal activity in cryptocurrencies, which includes drugs but also other things like weapons, hacks, pornography, thefts, is relatively substantial. Estimating the total black market across the whole world, I think that's a very challenging task. But indeed, to put it into those terms would be very useful.
Thank you so much. Let's have a big hand of applause for Talis.